So the other thing that we need to do is to make sure that we account for error handling and then figure out how do we get these changes that we made to all the other bumpers that we made in our level. So to do that, first off, let's look at this. Actually, let's address the prefab. So right now we have this bumper, we have these this bump particle, this audio source. It's all synced into this script, but we have other bumpers that we've already laid out in our level. If we turn this into a prefab, and actually we already have turned this into a prefab, so we could actually drag and drop this in, or another simple way of propagating the changes that we made on this prefab to everything else out in the level. Up here, if you select the bumper, because this is a prefab, you get access to these prefab options. If I were to say revert, then do not click that. If I were to say revert, this would revert all of the things related to this prefab to whatever is currently saved down in your project. So I could on the project, and you'll see that we didn't have any of this other stuff set up. We don't have child objects, so don't hit that button. But if we hit apply, this will say, I want to make this the new default template for all the prefabs of bumper. And that's actually what we want to do, because as soon as we hit apply, this will turn every single other instance of this bumper prefab into what we've done here. So if I hit apply, give that a second, you'll see if we look at all our other bumpers, all the changes that we did, we added these bump particles and audio sources underneath them. It will, they'll now trigger. So once we've done that, or the other option is you could drag and drop this back into your original bumper and it would replace it. Either way, it's just a shortcut. This applies just like saying, save this as the new prefab, save my changes. If I hit play, and I go to the other bumpers, hopefully, if this all worked, right? Now we have all our instances of our mechanics functioning like our setup over here. The next thing that may have happened to you if you got messed up along the way, but we actually don't have any error handling for this. Whenever we're linking into a reference to something in the scene, if we try to access that reference and do something like run a function, but we did not have, let's say that we did not have a reference, you might see something like this. So I'm going to delete my references. So these are now empty variables. But if we try to play them, so this is still currently empty because if I delete them out, they're not being filled by anything. So this is just a null reference, and I'm trying to say play, it's going to shoot out an error message at me. So just to show you what this looks like in your debug, I go over here. See, it's going to give you an error message or possibly even two. And that's coming from, it's trying to access this component and do something, but nothing's there. So I'm going to rehook these up like that. So that's fixed. I'm just gonna, you could either revert or you could apply, whatever. To make sure that this doesn't happen though, I'm going to put this line of code. This is just saying if feedback particle is not equal null, and this is a common thing that we could put in our code, but this is saying if it's not empty, then do something. We want to make sure that there's actually something in there before we do the thing. And then, shorthand is you don't need the brackets for a one-line piece of code, but it's always good practice to do that. I'm going to do the same thing for my audio. If feedback audio, this variable, this empty container that we have is not equal to null, then play that. Now you could keep going into error handling. For example, like what if you had your audio clip, you could check and make sure there's an audio clip there, for example. Otherwise, when you play it, you may not hear something. And maybe this is fine. Actually, I'm just going to test this real quick because it might be fine. Right, so we're not getting an error message, but we're not hearing the sound. But maybe you want to throw a warning or something that if something's not there. But I think it's fine for now. And I'm actually just gonna can't remember what it was. So I think if I undo, that'll come back here. Yeah, there we go. So anyways, error handling is a good, good practice to make sure that you're not, as a designer, you may forget to fill in a reference or something, and then you're getting errors in your code and you don't know why, and that could be very bad. So it's good to have this kind of stuff as you're creating your scripts, especially if you're relying on outside reference up here. And actually, the last thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna show you a little trick for coding, a little shortcut. If I highlight this right here and you're inside of Visual Studio, if you right click and you go to Quick Actions and Refactoring, and this is saying where do you want it, I'm just gonna hit enter. And you'll see what happened. It highlighted it, made a new function and broke that out into a separate thing. I'm just gonna call this play feedback. And this is a shortcut for just saying all this code that I had highlighted, I just want to put it into a function and break it out, and it'll break that out automatically. So you could do the same thing. You could, type your new function down here. You could put the code down there and you could call it up here. It's all the same thing. It's just a little shorter way to do it. So now in code, we're saying when this bounce happens, instead of adding our comments here, right, like having all this code inside this code block, I'm creating a function that is just labeled properly, saying, well, this is where we play the feedback. And down in here, play feedback. If we want to know anything about how the feedback is played, we just look down here in this function. It's private, nothing else can access it, so it's pretty self-contained. And then we're playing our visual feedback, and then we're playing our audio feedback, and we're done. And just one final test here to make sure this works. I'm going to select my bumper, ensure that all the changes we made are proper. Hit save, hit play, and you're good to go. And you could add more feedback to your collectibles and so forth. Make sure that you have as much feedback as you can on all of your level objects, and you could even go further with feedback if you want. You could have a flash on the player, for example. Whenever you get bumped. You could have a screen shake when you get bumped. You could have a color overlay on top of your camera that flashes. You could take this as far as you want, really. But for these projects, I'm just make sure that you have some sort of audio and visual representation for something that happens. And that's the main things that I'm looking for, and good practice to have inside of your project.